screen, there should, yep, recording is in progress. And over here on the left, here we go. Here's the slate, officers again, and new board members. So please vote by raising your hand. And I have the pleasure of working with Chris Wood and Allison Black tonight, and they are tallying the votes right now. And when they tell us that we've reached the quota that we need, we will proceed. Okay. Chris says we're good. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We've elected the officers and the new board members, and we're good to go. So let's go on to the next thing. Let me give some details of the 2021 report. And let me point out to everybody that this slide deck will be available at our website. So I'm going to go over some of these slides quickly, and some of these slides are detailed. So if I go too fast or too much detail, please feel free to go to our website and click on this slide deck, and you can be able to look at all these slides. And that's what this says. You can get to our website simply by going to an internet browser and typing in ctbirding.org, obviously short for connecticutbirding.org, ctbirding.org. So let me just come back to a point, and that is a few months ago, very recently, CAS, Connecticut Audubon Society, published the state of the birds, and it was scary. Lots of birds reduced. 3 billion birds are gone. So our role, bird watchers, looking at canary in the mine, just seeing changes in the environment, boy, this publication did it, and it makes us think there's a problem. So it's kind of depressing, but we're going to look at this from the positive way that we can. And let me introduce one little diagram here. It's the only diagram, and please forgive me, and I'll be brief on this, but the whole point of this diagram is on the right, you see birds. These are the top. On the right, you see the green box, which is one of the 7 top priorities for COA, namely birds per se, that nice Blackburnian warbler. And number 2 is birders doing birding, bird watching, bird study, and all that involves. And number 3 is the birders doing data entry via eBird or Christmas bird counts or summer bird counts or state bird atlas, which leads into science. Number 4, which leads to conservation, which requires the science to know how to plan, to do the politics, to make decisions, and to lead to actions. And hopefully conservation leads to the birds, protection, conservation, and bringing back. So that's the gist of how we think conservation should help this problem that we have of declining birds. So what did we do in 2021? Here, I boiled it down to 10 things. We had to deal with the pandemic, which brought us new birders, and we had to make sure we were a big tent organization. We had to become more transparent and make sure we were welcoming and do communications to everyone. We wanted to go back and focus on seasonality because it's a great window into nature and how everything is changing. We wanted to emphasize science. We want to emphasize conservation. We want to emphasize education and of course, birding, quote unquote, which is all of this. but in particular, it's what people think of when they think of birding. It's probably why a lot of people join COA. And then the machinery for COA includes IT and infrastructure and collaboration and so on. Let me just step through these things. As I said, you can go back and look at them later on your own. The pandemic, we wanted to be very welcoming to new birders to help them learn more. So we came up with a new idea field trip for new birders. Unfortunately, it got rained out 3.5 times. Finally, on the 4th time, we went out anyway. And we had a good time on a boat in Long Island Sound. The second concept is a birding community, and make sure it's a big tent, make sure that we support new birders as well as experienced birders and birders who travel the world, birders who lead trips around the world, birders who can identify subspecies and the most difficult gulls, and so on, and helping all the new birders come up the learning curve. Okay, the second point related to that is we wanted to be transparent and welcoming. So we went back and we did a project to focus on the history of COA and to give recognition and thanks to all of those people who were at the root of COA in the early 1980s and how it got started. And some of that you can see at our website. And that's why we did
19 hours.
It's 7 o'clock. And that's why we did the bios and the pictures of the board members I showed you, all of whom you can find at our website. And same for the affiliates. And the same for the ARCC members. And by the way, the website is continually improving, thanks largely to Cynthia Ellinger, who's made it much better than it was a year and 2 years ago. So thank you so much, Cynthia. The other vehicle for being transparent was CT Bird's listserv, and the new moderator, that is Chuck in Bergamo, replacing Roy Harvey. That was a very dynamic tool that COA has at its service, the CT Bird's listserv. And what we call the TCW, the Connecticut Warbler, the annual journal, which is a fantastic scientific document, thanks to Greg Hanasek and Manny Marasotis, as I said before. And then the COA Bulletin, which continues to get stronger and stronger, thanks to Andrew Dazinger. And I won't forget the new logo, thanks to Julian Huff. Thank you all. The other idea, the other theme we had was seasonality. That is, we're very lucky to live in a climate which has very dynamic seasons, and it's very exciting, and it gives us a window into nature as it changes month by month. So we wanted to focus on that. So we came up with the idea of a Bird of the Month report, and we started that. And by the way, that segues into the Birds by the Season bar chart, which is being updated right now. And let me jump to that so you can see what I'm talking about. So on the bar chart on the left is the COA Birds by the Season bar chart, originally by Greg Hanasek and now being updated by Frank Gallo. It gives a month by month look at how the birds are changing in the state, when they're breeding, if they're breeding, and so forth. COA has a long history of studying this, and the research committee project extends that to birds' food web cycles. For example, down below is a comparable bar chart for the marine food web, and we're trying to synchronize that back to the Birds by the Season food web so that we can understand if there are cycle differences in timing. For example, when red knots arrive, will their food sources be available, or will they already have hatched out? And these timing differences are causing a lot of problems in birds. So this is a very essential part of current ornithological research, science. We decided we needed to emphasize science and ecology more. So we came up with the November 6th Science Conference. We'll probably do another one this year. And by the way, tonight's meeting, our annual meeting tonight, in 20 minutes, we're going to hear about Arctic changes and the science behind that. So this is really a science talk. And of course, we all supported the Bird Atlas, the Connecticut Bird Atlas, another contribution to science, and all the other things we do to support science, the Summer Bird Council, Christmas Bird Council, and so on. Much of it goes into eBird and to other channels to capture the information. So thank you all for using eBird so much, because it enables the scientists to take our field work and translate it into data for the conservationists to use to understand what has to be fixed. Conservation. There are all kinds of things we're doing in conservation. Wish we had time to go into it. Craig Rapaz and Patrick Commons have been central to this. I'm not even going to get into it here because it would take a long time to give you all this stories, including we're working with Plum Island. We're working currently with the Lights Out New Haven and Lights Out Connecticut project and the Magnuson Stevens Fishery project and so on. Education. We believe education is everything in everything COA does. And we're trying to take the experienced birders and help the newer birders learn what they can from them. We believe we maximize conservation by maximizing education. A great example last spring was Chris Wood's, the current vice president, Chris Wood's Warbler Workshop. It drew 450 viewers back in whenever it was, April, I guess. And that's an amazing number of people who have an interest in birds, in warblers, and in wanting to enjoy the spring. And we use that to educate people to how to identify them and then to put those information into eBird and so forth. Thank you very much, Chris, for that. And thank you very much for Kathy and Maureen for supporting all that so much. And then birding, quote unquote, birding is everything we do. But in particular, I bulleted out the CT Birds listserv for all its great exchange and communication of birds, like the gull today. That was great. Is it better than the Kamchatka gull? I don't know. But there's a great example of what I call high voltage birding. Of course, ARCC is central to birding. The Birds of Connecticut checklist has been updated by ARCC. They're working on the seasonal birds, the species chart. There's Frank Gallo. Frank Gallo actually does a lot of these things. Frank is a birding personified. He leads bird trips around the world. Frank Gallo is co-secretary of ARCC. Frank created the current checklist of CT birds. He's almost done with the new seasonal species bird chart. He also wrote Birding in Connecticut, a very excellent book. He leads big day competition and so on and so on. So we're all about birding. COA is all about birding. However, to do that, we have some machinery. We need to keep the IT and the infrastructure working. Steve Maritko is our guy there. He does all these things that I listed, including, for example, working with Larry Reiter. Larry has been Mr. Membership for, I don't know how many years, 8 years, 10 years, I've lost track, and running the database for membership. And now Larry and Steve are working together to try and modernize to a new member database to automate membership and joining and renewing and paying. And that's an ongoing project. And we're working through any little wrinkles there, and hopefully it'll all be fine. And we like everyone to go with the automated methods, but some people we know still like to write checks. So we will accept that, although we'd prefer if you go automated using credit cards. And collaborations and teamwork. I just started to list all of the organizations we collaborate with, and it was on and on and on. Here's the list of all the organizations we collaborate with. And then I realized it wasn't all the list. Actually, it goes on. There's more organizations we collaborate with. Chris Wood is very central to all of that. And by the way, let me go back to the previous slide. Greg Hanasek is central to this because he is the Connecticut State Reviewer for eBird. So we have a very tight collaboration with eBird. And okay, and the final point I want to make is that people and data are crucial for us. So, for example, finding backup persons for key roles in case a primary person moves on. We try to do that as much as we can. It's really important to have good people who are dedicated for at least a couple of years to doing some of these important jobs. And then next is finding the replacement people when the original persons move on. Such as the example below. Roy Harvey wanted to move on after 14 years, multiplied by 365 days a year. And Chuck Imbergamo said, I'll step up, I'll do it. Chuck, we love you. We're so glad. And Roy, we love you. So this is just incredible. If we can get, help with IT and help with a number of other things, we'll deeply appreciate it. Let me shift over to data. A lot of what COA captures that's of value is data about birds, when the birds arrive, how many numbers there are, how it changes over time, how it changes over the seasons, how it changes over decades. and also backing up that crucial data. So we're focusing on that. We're focusing on securing old bird data from people who've got old records and so forth. Okay, that's my summary of what happened last year at COA. A few final words. First of all, I want to thank you for your time and your votes. The slate of officers and new board members has been approved. If there are any questions, please put them in the chat and we will take them in the next couple of minutes. After that, we will take a break. Please stay connected. Don't disconnect your computers for the break. It's 7:09. So we're going to resume at 7. Stay connected. But at 7:30, Dr. George Divoky will start his presentation. And between now and then, we're going to have some Q&A, which we'll have right now. And then we're going to go into a break. So make sure you come back before 7:30, but hang on here for Q&A. I'd come back here at 7:28 or 7:27 to make sure you don't miss anything and you don't have any mechanical problems. So Q&A. And again, relying on Chris Wood and Allison Black. Can you please tell us, do we have any? Yeah, Chris Wood says make that 7:20. So I guess we're going to resume at 7:20. So can you, Chris, or Allison, tell us anything about the questions coming in?
No questions, Tom. Go ahead into the in memoriam and the subsequent slides.
Okay. Okay. And as I said, you can find this slide deck on our website. Let me just say that we're going now to have a very interesting presentation by George Divoky, and it's going to be all about how the Arctic is changing. And at the root of it is what we face in Long Island Sound. So here's a little preview of it, and that is, what do birds eat? Which is my favorite question. And it happens in Long Island Sound, where these common terns have to feed their young ones the right fish so they can swallow it and get nutrition. And we're going to see the same thing in the Arctic in a few minutes. This is Frank Mantlick's beautiful picture. So that's a preview of Dr. George Divoky. Here he is. Let me just show you some of his field data. And I've spoken to George a couple of times recently. I'll give a longer introduction for him when we resume. And he is quite a story to tell based on his almost 5 decades of years in the Arctic, looking at black guillemots and how they're changing and why. So Chris or Allison, what is the idea about 7:20 now? It's 7:11. What's the idea about 7:20? Are we resuming earlier?
You were going to go through the memorials, Tom, and then I will take over and run a promotion slides for about 10 minutes.
Okay. So I'm just going to step through the memoriam slides here. We lost, unfortunately, a number of good people. We have 4 of them here last year who we lost. I'm going to just not say anything, but just let these slides come up for 1 minute at a time so we can see the great people who we've lost. Okay. These are the 4 people we lost last year. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, Tom, you can introduce George whenever you're ready, if George is ready as well.
I'm ready. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you, George. Tom, unmute yourself.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? George, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Tom.
Okay, great. I've had the pleasure of talking to George earlier today, so he and I are on first name terms. It's great. And his last name, however, is pronounced Divoky, not Divoky, so Divoky. Okay, George Divoky, given that he's spent so many decades working on this, I'm going to give him a long introduction. So bear with me while I introduce him thoroughly. George Divoky has studied Alaskan seabirds since 1970, when, as a research associate at the Smithsonian Institution, he participated in a 3-year census of marine birds and mammals in response to the discovery of oil at Prudhoe Bay. In 1975, he began a study of Manse black guillemots, that's a subspecies, an ice obligate seabird on Cooper Island, 35 kilometers east of Point Barrow, Alaska. The study, now 47 years in duration, is the longest continuous seabird study in the Arctic, and its findings on the consequences of decadal scale reductions in snow and sea ice to seabird demographics and breeding provide some of the best examples of the long-term biological consequences of climate change. Divoky has worked for federal and state agencies on a range of Alaskan seabird management and conservation issues, including the Alaska Native Land Claims Settlement Act, oil and gas exploration of the outer continental shelf, and oil spill damage assessment and restoration. He is currently director of Cooper Island Arctic Research, funded by the Seattle-based nonprofit Friends of Cooper Island. Divoky's research on the black guillemots of Cooper Island was featured in a cover story in the New York Times Magazine entitled, quote, George Divoky's Planet, unquote, in the PBS Scientific American. It's also in the PBS Scientific American Frontiers program, Hot Times in Alaska, with Alan Alda, and on ABC Nightly News and Nightline. He has appeared on The Late Show with David Letterman, and he's been interviewed on NPR's Talk of the Nation, On Point, which I love, and Science Friday, which I also love. His research and experiences on Cooper Island were featured in a play about climate change called Greenland, staged by the Royal National Theatre in London in 2011. Audubon magazine featured his work in a 2017 article. I think the quote, the title here is, Can These Seabirds Adapt Fast Enough to Survive? George Divoky was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, has a bachelor's and master's degree from Michigan State University and a doctorate from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. George, Dr. Divoky, we are honored to have you here. Go for it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tom. It is a pleasure and honor to be here for a Midwestern birder who knew about Connecticut being kind of the center of what was going on with birding, and Roger Tory Peterson in the 60s when I was coming up as a birder. I've always thought about your area as being one of the places that I would like to go to and see, but never had the chance. I'm going to share my screen now if I can. Is that good? Do you have that?
Perfect, George.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, I mean, I told Tom I'm very happy to give this talk, and one of the reasons is because I typically talk to either oceanographers or climate scientists or other people who don't understand my connection with birds. And given the time that I've spent looking at your website and seeing what you were doing, I think I can admit that, okay, I am basically a birder that has been masquerading as a climate change scientist for some time, but it is my connection with the birds that have that has kept me going back to the Arctic every summer, and you know, and surprisingly has had me find out those things that I have found out. Manse black guillemot is the species I'll be talking about today, and I wish I could talk to you about some of the other seabirds and other birds I've seen on Cooper Island, because I know as birders you're probably wondering what else I've seen, and maybe we'll have time to get into that. but I will be talking about the species that I first encountered when I went up to the Arctic in 1970, and it is most of you know guillemots. Probably you have them on your life list from Maine and places like that. These black guillemots are ice adapted, and they are different than the black guillemots that you find in Great Britain and elsewhere. In terms of how I got to Alaska, the rather short story is that I was at the Smithsonian in 1970 when the Coast Guard realized that Prudhoe Bay oil needed to be exploited, but that the Trans-Alaska oil pipeline was being held up, so that there was a potential for them taking super tankers into the Arctic Ocean to get the oil and take it to the East Coast. This would have meant that obviously there'd be major dangers to anything that was present in the Arctic Ocean offshore of Prudhoe Bay. So the Coast Guard Oceanographic Unit had us go out and do censusing in 1970, 71, and 72 to see what was there. And really no one had censused that area to any great extent at all. They actually did, prior to our work, take a super tanker through the Northwest Passage, the Manhattan. It took one 55-gallon drum back to the East Coast, one 55-gallon drum of Prudhoe Bay crude, and had some rather major damage to the hull. And they realized, okay, we can't build super tankers that can deal with this ice, so we are going to have to wait for the pipeline to be built. So I censused. Sorry, that's not, sorry. That isn't. Sorry about that. I went up and I was able to census the barrier islands. I did offshore surveys of seabirds, and I was able to census the barrier islands. Now, the north coast of Alaska doesn't have any of the rocky headlands that are found in the southern part of the state and in the western part of the state, where you have major seabird colonies. It's mainly low bluffs breaking into the sea with barrier islands just offshore. So I was dropped off by Coast Guard helicopters every day in 1972 at one end of a long barrier island, walked the extent of the island, and was picked up at the end. And it was classic Lewis and Clark type natural history, where no one had been up there. I was trying to see what was breeding there. And in terms of breeding bird habitat, there isn't much. This is what the barrier islands typically look like. Up in the Beaufort Sea, there is driftwood, which has come some distance because this is well north of the tree line, and this is the only habitat that's really available for breeding birds. And what I would find are things like this tern nest, and things like this Sabines gull nest. So that it was mainly glaucous gulls, Sabines gulls, long-tailed ducks, eiders on some islands, brant on others. But it was interesting. But I had a real interest in seabirds as a group, which would include the tube noses and the alcids. And this is a young Sabines gull that I saw on one of the islands. But Cooper Island, when I got there, I had no idea, as I was walking along, that I would encounter a place where the Navy had a camp in the 1950s. And they were testing a number of things. And basically, when they left, they did what people did in the 50s. They didn't clean anything up. They just left all of their floorboards, all their wooden boxes and various things there. And so they had left this there. And as it turns out, that black guillemots were finding cavities to breed in. Now, black guillemots are cavity nesters that had not bred in the Beaufort Sea prior to, or there had been no record of them breeding in the Beaufort Sea prior to my finding them there because there are no natural rock cavities along roughly, like 1,000 kilometers of coastline. So this was very exciting. I mean, I have nothing against terns, gulls, and brant and eiders, but this was very exciting to find the first record of black guillemots breeding in the Beaufort Sea, and using these boxes and other debris that had been left there. So like what I did is what anyone who's 26 years old and really psyched about finding an Arctic seabird breeding these boxes, I turned over as many sites as I could. There was a lot of debris there. And when I went back in July, or rather in August, and this is a picture of me in August of '72, that I found birds breeding in sites I had created earlier in the summer. And anyone who's ever put up a bird feeder, and certainly if you put up a birdhouse and you have birds then using the feeder or using the birdhouse, you get a connection with them that's a little bit more than if you're just walking through some habitat and looking up at the birds. And suddenly I had this connection. I had this connection with black guillemots. So this was the start of a long-term relationship that I didn't realize was going to be a long-term relationship. My work for that Coast Guard cruise was over in 1972, and I didn't think I would ever be back, though we wrote up a note about the first record of black guillemots breeding in Arctic Alaska, or breeding in the Beaufort Sea, and we had visited some other sites where we also found some black guillemots. But what happened, and much of and this is an important thing to think about in terms of, I went up there because of oil concerns, because of the pipeline and the concerns about spilled oil. I went back in '75 because of the Arab oil embargo in the early '70s, and Richard Nixon said we're going to start drilling offshore because we don't want to be dependent on foreign sources for oil. So I got a grant to go study birds at the ice edge, and I thought it was going to be on an icebreaker, but they said, oh, there are no icebreakers going north this year. Can't you go someplace else? And I said, yeah, I know an island where I can go, where I know that there's ice just offshore and there are birds present there too. So what's important is that I started my interest in seabirds in the 1960s, in the late 1960s, but I realized very early on that I would have a problem because seabirds breed in places. Seabirds as a group have one problem. They can't breed where they feed. So they have to breed at a place where they can keep their eggs and young safe while they go off and exploit marine resources. And one of the more common things that they do at murres and kittiwakes and a range of other things, breed on cliffs, or they breed very deep back in burrows and various things like that. I have a major fear of heights, which would certainly stop me from going to the edge of cliffs, and I even have friends who study murres and kittiwakes who will actually go over the edge of cliffs with ropes and do things like that. And as I tell my son, we come from a long line of people who didn't go over the edge of cliffs unless we were forced to. So I really didn't want to do that. And the other issue is that I may have at least a minor amount of ADD. And if I went to a real seabird colony like this murre colony and said, okay, I'm going to study a focal group here, I would probably be distracted by something that's happening over there. So like both of these places, and I had been at colonies just like this in the early '70s, meant that it would be tough to do the sort of work I wanted to do with seabirds. So what I did instead was create possibly the least attractive seabird colony in the state of Alaska. It looks like a parking lot where people have left wood with a bunch of pigeon-like birds walking around. But it was one that I could feel very comfortable working in, and it gave me access to all the nest contents and the parent birds, so I could do the sort of study that I wanted to do, which was focusing on individual birds. And I don't know if you haven't read, if you ever have read Lockley's book on puffins and shearwaters, he basically writes these little he writes a text that basically follows individual birds, and they are made up. They're based on birds that he had banded, and he kind of puts a life together. But I was able, what I really wanted to do was study individual birds through time. Now, when I thought about studying seabirds, I thought I'd be going to a seabird colony like this Irish black guillemot colony, but instead I've been as I said, going to Cooper Island, which is not as picturesque, but has much more access. So going back in 1975 for my work that was tied in with the response to the Arab oil embargo, I basically created nest sites, which was not hard to do because they are very plastic in their choice of nest sites. So if I turned over any wood or created any box and things like that, I could create a place where guillemots would breed. And I did that up until the late 80s. One of the things that happened, I planned to go further with this, but Ronald Reagan was voted in 1980, and as a result, my funding ended. So that was the point at which I said, okay, you are going to have to go back on your own, and because you're on your own, you can't make the colony any bigger. So when people ask me what was the ultimate thing that controlled the size of your colony, I always tell them it was Ronald Reagan. But what was great was that as I created those nest sites, the guillemots were as excited as I was to be on Cooper Island, and they like occupied them quickly. And even in the late 80s, as you can see there, these were places where the sites were big enough that you could have more than one pair breeding. And I have kept this y-axis as total breeders rather than pairs because it helps in terms of talking about about some of the larger pictures. So I provided 200 nest sites, and they moved in, and that is the real. And now I want to tell you about the real reason I've done a half-century study in the Alaska Arctic. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and I was a student at a school at a high school in the early 60s where I did not fit in for a range of reasons. And I didn't know until I started birding that Ohio has all this habitat that you could drive through very quickly, and see lots of different species in lots of different habitats. The Kirtland Bird Club, which just like your organization does, stimulates interest in youth trying to get into birding. And in 1962-63, there weren't many people who were trying to get into birding who were in high school. But I was able to go to the Kirtland Bird Club and talk about my observations, and was encouraged to keep my work going. They encouraged me a bit too much because I skipped my senior year spring semester because of the warbler wave going through Cleveland, Ohio, and had to take a second year of high school because of that. But it wasn't bad because I was tutored the second year, so I got to watch the warbler wave in 1964 and 65, which I think was a win-win situation. And what was really something was that I happened to live in Shaker Heights, Ohio, where the Shakers had dammed they had dammed a stream and made a series of lakes. So on my way to high school, and also within a rather short distance of my house, I could bird all that I wanted. So basically, I birded from 1962 until 1970, when I was asked by somebody, hey, would you like to go to the Arctic and be on an icebreaker? And any birder who was like asked that would say, of course I would. And also I had access to great beech maple climax forests around the Cleveland area. So like I said, sure, I'll do it. So I did it because I was a birder, and I became an ornithologist because of that. So though it's interesting, if you go online during the International Polar Year, they came up and had somebody spend some time with me in my camp, and he made a video and called it "The Bird Watcher Who Saw the Future." There are people who don't want to be identified as bird watchers, and of course now it's just a birder. But like I have no problems with that, because I am just as happy as owning up to that title as I am to an ornithologist. So Manse black guillemot is the high Arctic subspecies of the black guillemot that you see in Maine and Great Britain. It is a great species to study because you can catch it at the nest. You can band and weigh the adults, set them free, and then they fly back to the nest site and don't go offshore and abandon their nest. You can then band all of the adults which like lets you know who they are. They are very tolerant of being handled, and because of that, you can get to know everyone. I've banded over 2,500 adults, 4,200 nestlings, who, when they come back, we give them triple color bands so we can identify them. And we have 7 generations of birds that we followed, and we know grandparents and great-grandparents and things like that. And one of the important things about Manx black guillemot is one of the few seabirds that's part of the ice of the pack ice ecosystem, the cryopelagic system, which has mainly ivory gull and black guillemot, Manx black guillemot, as the only 2 seabird species, though murres and other birds that get up into the Arctic, but also have major subarctic components come in. And Arctic cod is the only prey to really feed on under the ice. Saffron cod are there in some of the more lower latitude areas, but if you're in the high Arctic and you are an upper level predator eating fish, you are eating an Arctic cod. And your mention earlier of what do birds eat, I mean, that is the whole talk. That is the whole point of this study. Is basically, this is basically an Arctic cod talk, if you will, more than a black guillemot talk, because almost everything that has been impacted that I'll be talking about is due to the availability or the abundance of Arctic cod. Briefly, and I thought as birders, you may be interested in knowing this, Manx black guillemot basically evolved and got separated from the rest of the guillemots during the last glacial maximum 25,000 years ago. They were apparently trapped in this in the Arctic Ocean, which had parts of it which were not glaciated, so it was just sea ice. These birds were able to persist there. There was a major bottleneck that occurred 25,000 years ago, and those birds I'm studying are the descendants of these birds that were able to make it in the high Arctic during the last glacial maximum. So just to put Cooper Island colony in perspective in terms of the whole Arctic, you can see where it is. This is a map that was made in 2008, which is a very optimistic view of where the sea ice is. But during the course of my study, Cooper Island and northern Alaska has experienced a major atmospheric warming. The average annual temperature, and this is striking. I mean, this is really, I mean, even though I've been there and have seen this, when I see images like this, that basically you have temperatures of 7 degrees Fahrenheit or warmer for the average annual temperature, and Cooper Island is right in the middle of it. And the whole state of Alaska has been warming. What is interesting here is that things look good in Southeast as such, because it's had, around 2 degrees Fahrenheit increase, which is about what Connecticut has experienced. And again, I mean, temperatures are rising everywhere. Temperatures are rising most rapidly in the Arctic, and because the Arctic is dominated by snow and ice habitats, it has habitats that are very sensitive to climate change. If you have a temperature change from 28 to 34 degrees, you have water go through a phase change. And when that happens, obviously everything changes if you have snow and ice habitats. Barrow, now known as Utqiagvik, Alaska, has had a temperature in the summer that has always straddled that phase change temperature of 32 Fahrenheit, 0 Celsius. So that on any given day up on my island, it can snow, and on any given day, ice can form right off the island, because the air temperature up until very recently has always dipped just below freezing at the coldest part of night, and always gets just a little bit above it. And that sort of area is going to show some of the most major changes due to temperature change, because obviously, for instance, Seattle, Washington, it was 38 degrees recently. Now it's 46. That doesn't really make any difference, because basically things feel pretty much the same. So this is how much things have warmed up in Utqiagvik, and you can see the timing of it. And what is again striking to me is that my study took in, luckily, a period of rather of like temperatures that were similar to recent decades, but then in the last 2 to 3 decades have had things that were not part of what has been seen. what this has caused is that offshore ice has gone through a major decline, and that September average is birds are fledging in September. So this is what the guillemots are dealing with at the end of their nestling period, and this is what the fledglings are fledging into. And you can see that I was able to get a few years where things were kind of as they were in the past. But ever since the late 20th and during the 21st century, there has been basically no ice off of Barrow. So what this means in terms of my study is that, and this is just an example from '84, ice used to be directly adjacent to the colony. I mean, you could see it all the time. And now, and this is 2012, but it's true for basically every year since then. It is now so far offshore that you certainly can't see it. And anything trying to breed on Cooper Island that was dependent on the cryopelagic system is going to be having a tough time. So I want to mention, because I find this really fascinating because the first time I heard it is that when you get ice melting, and this deals with more global issues rather than just some birds having their food source taken away, it deals with how the Earth is absorbing solar radiation now. Ice is one of the best things for reflecting solar radiation, with 85% going back into the atmosphere. Seawater is one of the best things for absorbing solar radiation, absorbing 93% of it. So that sort of change that I showed in the previous slide means that a very large area of the Arctic that had been reflecting solar radiation was now absorbing it. And this is another way of looking at what happens. And what this means is that it isn't just the seawater temperature that's increasing. You also have increase in atmospheric temperatures adjacent to land that used to have ice next to it, but now just has water. So that loss of ice, and then there is the feedback loop, because the ice forms later in the year. It's thinner, it melts earlier the following year, and then it keeps getting worse and worse through time. So as the ice melts, the sea surface temperature becomes much warmer, so that for a range of marine animals, not just ones in the cryopelagic system, their thermo neutral zone is being tested as this happens. And it is important to think about this also in the fact that this is not just an Arctic talk. This is about the whole globe, if you will. Prior to my study, for the 25 years prior to my study, 1950 to 1975, there was no real global warming at all, and certainly not in Arctic Alaska. During my study, this is what's happened. Arctic Alaska is one of the most rapidly warming places, and essentially every place else in the world is warming. It's just a question of what rate it's warming. So one of the first things I found out that was an indication of how warming was impacting the birds was that I saw this change in when the birds come to the island. Now, this is what Cooper Island looks like in March. It probably looks, this is a satellite image. Cooper Island is in the short fast ice. There is this area offshore where black guillemots stage in the spring. They actually occupy this very early on while it still looks like this, which is why they're such a great ice adapted species, that they can actually get by with that. And while they're out there, they actually molt from their winter plumage into their breeding plumage. Now, I don't know if any of you, and you must follow molts to a certain extent. One of the things I only realized recently is that black guillemots are the only Arctic seabird that goes back to the Arctic and molts into its breeding plumage. All of the waterfowl and most everything else you can think of that would breed in the Arctic molts on its wintering ground or in some staging area. But masked black guillemots are such Arctic seabirds, they can basically replace all their body feathers just by feeding out here on Arctic cod. And that's, yeah, I mean, it really does make it a true Arctic seabird. So in early June, which is when the birds start coming into the colony, it still has a great deal of open water out here in the Chukchi, but none in the Beaufort and none in the area of the colony. So they have to fly from the Chukchi over to the colony during the first weeks of the breeding season, because there is no open water adjacent to the colony. We visited Cooper in 1984 because we wanted to see what was going on in the early part of the breeding season, not knowing that the island was snow covered. Pilots had told us that there wasn't much snow on it. So we got out there and realized that there was a lot of snow on it. There was so much snow on it that I said, okay, I had two field assistants. I said, let's set up, there's each of our tents there. I said, let's set up our camp here. And then I was walking and I saw this thing breaking out and I realized, oh, this is a pile of driftwood that's on the south shore of the island. And I realized that over here meant that we were basically on the ocean. So I had to go back to tell my two field assistants that, hey, we better move camp because of the fact that we aren't really on the island. And that isn't the thing you want to do if you're the camp supervisor and they're going to be there for the rest of the summer, because anything you say past that point might be like, oh, by the way, is this one of your good ideas? Like, hey, maybe we should camp here. And one of those people, and this is actually true, stopped doing research in ornithology because he went into a different discipline, went into real estate. And I always think it is due to the fact that he got stuck there because he realized location is the important thing when you are picking a place to live. So when we were out there, we saw that all the nest sites were covered with snow, and that the guillemots, when they came in, were circling at some altitude like every night, and we were waiting for them to come down and sit. We didn't know exactly what was going on. We assumed they would be coming down and sitting there on the snow, but they didn't show up until there was actually some melt going on. And that it was clear that they came in when they could land and have access to their nest cavities. It turns out that females don't ovulate until they have access to nest cavity. If you are a blackbird sitting on a white background, there's no real benefit of landing on Cooper before these sites are available, so that they don't land until it's available. And we didn't realize how important that timing of coming in when the snow melted was until 1988, when late in the season, and as I said, it'll snow any day of the year on Cooper, but there was a very persistent snowstorm and a freezing period in 1988 that had snowdrifts forming around many of the nest sites, like this one. And parent birds were coming back to feed their young that are in this nest site, and they could not access the nest site because of the snow. So it was a thing of, okay, we can see what would happen if you had a short field season, if you had a short season up here in terms of the summer, that birds wouldn't be able to raise young prior to the actual accumulation of the winter snow. So we know that the breeding period for black guillemots, it takes 14 days from the time a female gets into a nest site to the time that the eggs are laid. The eggs are then incubated. They have 2 eggs. They're incubated for roughly 31 days. And they have a chick that hatches at 31 days that then has this major increase in growth from a 35-gram chick to a basically adult-sized 350-gram fledgling. And it is a 35-day nesting period, so that the complete period for breeding from the female going into the nest cavity to the young fledgling is 80 days. And what I then started looking at what the snow-free period had been at Barrow, or has been at Barrow, and you can see that it basically it was from mid-June, at least up until very recently, up until early September. And I then looked back because I realized that they had not found guillemots breeding in Arctic Alaska until the late 60s. I looked at the length of the snow-free period and saw that in terms of the 80-day period, frequently prior to the 1960s, the summer was too short for guillemots to breed successfully. And that the first breeding at Point Barrow, which was the first breeding in Arctic Alaska, occurred in 1968. I found the Cooper Island colony in 72. And that the only year that we saw where the nest sites had restricted access was in 1988. So it seemed like even the presence of the birds on Cooper Island was a sign that things were getting warmer, because it is very unlikely that they were breeding in the area. guillemots can also breed in driftwood piles. We've seen that at various locations. So in the past, they wouldn't have had to have man-made sites. But I think one of the things to think about here in terms of climate change, and it goes past our interest in birds, is that during the period of my study, there has been basically a month added to the summer, from roughly 100-day summer going up to maybe like 130 days. So I mean that's what climate change has done to the snow cover in Arctic Alaska over the past 50 years. So what I then did is looked at other colonies and when they were formed on the North Slope and in Canada, and realized that it was mainly after 1965 that you had this range expansion into Canada and into the northern Chukchi and Beaufort Seas, so that the changes that we were seeing were almost certainly due to the fact that things were getting warmer. Now, as part of that getting warmer, we realized birds come in and lay eggs right against the edge of the winter. This is a nest site where a bird has laid right next to a major ice mass that had formed in one of the nest sites, and that the timing of snowmelt was getting earlier, and that egg laying was also getting earlier. And this was actually the first major thing that we found out, and was actually the thing that I approached the people who were then looking at climate change in the late 90s and were concerned about it. It was Al Gore's group and various people like that. And this was the first indication that things were changing. This is just to show you what can happen to a bird breeding on Cooper that lays its eggs early. And this is the 20th of June. There was like no snow at roughly 8 o'clock. By like 9 o'clock, it had started to snow. By like 9:15, it had really snowed. And by the following morning, snow had covered up the nest site. Though, as almost always happens, things started to warm up and melted the snow. And then the bird was able to get back. This bird had eggs in the nest. But again, the birds are always playing, at least in the past, were always playing with snow cover and just how soon could they breed. And as I said, they need to breed early so that they don't get their young trapped in the nest site. So dates of snow disappearance at Barrow have gotten very early. And when I went to plot the 2015 value on the old graph, this is what happened. And I realized, okay, I should shift this down. But when they say that a value is literally off the charts, I think it's important to show that it's off the charts. I think that that if I did, and of course I did later on have to move down the like y-axis so that it like started in mid-May rather than late May. But this gives an indication of just how much things have changed. And it is that kind of, I mean, this is the shifting baseline where you basically get used to something, and now somebody looking at things in the future may say, oh yeah, it's always been that way. And of course, this is one of the benefits of doing a long-term study, is that it like always hasn't been that way. One of the things that is interesting about this is that the NOAA has a monitoring station that looks at snowmelt and also looks at CO2 levels and various things like that in Utqiagvik, Alaska. And they were so struck by the fact that like things had changed. They did a press release on the fact that snow had melted much earlier than it had in the past. They called me up, or they emailed me, and they said, could you send us an image, because we want to show something that ties in with this early snow melt. And of course, you can't show an image of snow melting. It's like showing an image of a paint drying. I mean, it isn't as interesting. But they gladly showed this picture of our black guillemots and mentioned, of course, the fact that the black guillemots have been responding to that. So as this atmospheric warming took place, that warming was also having an impact that was going to be ultimately negative for this. But the original impact of climate change in Arctic Alaska was beneficial for the guillemots because they could colonize the area and then had a longer breeding season where they could raise their young. Arctic cod, as I mentioned, are the primary forage fish that's tied into the cryopelagic system. Black guillemots are a specialist on Arctic cod, and they have to have a lot of Arctic cod very close by because they feed their chicks approximately once per hour. They make one trip to the nest per hour, and they typically have 2 chicks. So they have to have a lot of Arctic cod in very close proximity, so that they can raise 2 chicks, going from both of them having a 10-fold increase in mass over a 5-week period. And and guillemots, this is one of the things I've only recently realized, guillemots aren't very good seabirds, because like a really good seabird goes out 50 or 60 miles and feeds wherever it wants. Guillemots, it turns out that these guys are feeding within probably 2 miles of the colony or so, because they have to get back with the fish so quickly. So they are foraging as close as they can to the colony. So when they find something, they can get back and then go back and forage again. So this is a problem for birds breeding on Cooper, because the ice surrounds the island in early June when they start breeding. It then pulls off during the breeding season, and in the past pulled off, at least this much, and then pulls off more by late August. And the issue is just how much it pulls off. I mean, in the past, it used to be maybe a quarter mile, if that. Now it's hundreds of miles. And what this means is that at the critical time of year for the guillemots, where their energy demands are highest, because the parent birds are trying to raise 2 chicks, they're also having to deal with their own energy demands, which are much higher because of the chick provisioning, that basically there is this retreat of ice, which means that their prey is being taken away during a critical time for them. And what has happened in the Arctic during the course of my study is that there has been this major decrease in the September ice extent. There has been a major decrease in the August ice concentration off Cooper Island. I didn't extend this up into the 2020s, but you can rest assured that the ice concentration directly north of Cooper has been at 0. And this is for the pixel, this is for the area directly north of Cooper. So that during my study, birds had a pretty good run of it, which like a 20 to 60% ice cover over that period is good. And then when it gets down to here, they are not going to be able to find prey for their young. So what they had to do instead, since they couldn't get Arctic cod, is they turned to an alternate prey, which is not ice associated. Sculpin are found in the near shore on the bottom, and are not schooling the way that Arctic cod are, so that you can't get large numbers of them directly next to the island. And most importantly, perhaps, is that they have this large spiny horned head that when a chick swallows it, it really can't digest anything for the next hour or so, whereas Arctic cod can pass through very quickly. That is the reason why, and this is a shot of a nest site where all these cod have been all these sculpin have been rejected by a chick, which I took out of the nest, because it's still trying to digest the first one. So it is calorically, it's pretty close to an Arctic cod in terms of energy density, but chicks can't eat enough of them per day to like maintain the same growth that they had in the past. And if you and in 2003, and this was the, I mean, in terms of my bringing back the birding thing of, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm seeing this. This was one of the first birds I saw coming back with a sculpin, with a big sculpin, after having seen Arctic cod for the previous 28 years. So that was really something. And there is a video of this, of the still image here of a parent bird trying to feed a chick a 4-horned sculpin, and the chick taking around 4 minutes to get it into its mouth, and then sitting there like the python that ate the pig and not being able to really move and such. So this like change in the sea surface temperature and the distance to ice caused this switch from the preferred prey to sculpin in the early 2000s. And we actually have, once we started seeing this shift being made, we did daily observations of the prey being brought in. And we happen to have 3 years, 2006, 7, and 11, that allowed us to see what a high ice year in 2006, a medium ice year in 2007, and a low ice year in 2011, what happened to prey during those years. In 2006, when the ice really didn't pull offshore, it was mainly all Arctic cod with just a few sculpin. In 2007, cod stayed up until almost mid-August or so. But then at the end of August, it was mainly a sculpin. And then in 2011, when the ice really pulled offshore, in like the first week in August, birds had to switch to sculpin. And this had major impacts on growth rates and chick survival. And by putting out data loggers, we've been able to see exactly when things drop off. I mean, and this is the percentage of Arctic cod being brought back per day, and that at roughly 2 degrees Celsius, cod start dropping out, and then sculpin start increasing. And at 3.5, there is a switch over to sculpin with very few cod being brought in at all once you get into warmer temperatures. So what this means is that in the past, parents that were feeding their chicks could turn around after feeding a chick, fly out and see this. And this is like a smorgasbord. I mean, God knows how many Arctic cod are under that ice. And this is what it looked like for at least 28 years, if not more. This is what it looks like north of Cooper Island now. There is no ice. There are almost certainly no Arctic cod, and guillemots would have no cue, as they had in the past, of where the ice would be and where the cod might be. So the guillemots have a very different seascape they're having to deal with because they are an Arctic seabird, and this does not look like an Arctic Ocean. One of the things that's happening as a result of that change in prey is that, and the impact on chicks is that with the alpha chick and the beta chick, you now have a situation. Oh, and I just wanted to show you this. This is the alpha chick, and that's just the wind. I'm sorry for the sound, but this is a chick that is thinking about fledging. They can't really flap when they're in the boxes. They can't flap when they're in the nest site, so they have to come out just at dusk and do this. And you can see the beta chick that is in there watching the alpha chick, and then basically the alpha chick goes in. But what happens is that when prey becomes limited, the alpha chick gets all the food. And this is, I picked up the top of the site. This is an alpha chick that has just been fed, has a nice, probably sculpin in its throat. This is the beta chick who's been forced to the back of the site by the alpha chick being aggressive, and will typically in that situation die after that. So we had never seen brood reduction before. We had only seen it once when a peregrine falcon took one of the parents from a nest. So there was 2 chicks being fed by 1 parent. But now brood reduction occurs all the time because of the change. We now see this also, and this is a sign. We didn't know what this was the first time we saw it, but this is basically where the older chick grabs the head of the younger chick and moves it back and forth and wears off all the feathers. So we do nest checks every day to see who lives and who dies and what's going on with their weight. In 2017, this is what happened with the beta chicks and the alpha chicks, and you can see how the beta chicks, the red bars, are the first ones to die. But 2017 was so bad that even after the beta chick had died, there wasn't enough to even sustain the alpha chick. So what is interesting though about that is that birds will go out now, and as in this picture, there are some birds that can still find Arctic cod, and there are others that just turn to sculpin. So there is a selection event going on, and certainly the population is going through a bottleneck. So it may well be, and we don't know who is going to be the winner, whether the birds that are switching to sculpin are going to be able to then keep that going because they'll be keyed in on sculpin because the cod will disappear, or if these birds are just maybe much more savvy and that they're feeding on cod as long as they can, and then will then switch to something else. So we've been putting out data loggers like this one here on this tarsus that tells us the temperature and the depth of birds as they're diving. And let's just look at diving effort for parents that are provisioning chicks. What we've found, and then this is again one of these very striking graphs, is that birds that are feeding in water that is warmer than 3 degrees Celsius certainly have increased time underwater, hours underwater. And in 2017, which was a very warm water year, birds were spending almost twice as much time. They were spending almost 6 hours underwater trying to provision chicks. And what's sad about it is that that was also the year that they really weren't being successful in that the chicks were dying. So that this change in the temperature and the prey availability is impacting certainly fledgling success and chick quality, and probably having a higher cost of reproduction for these. So we don't know if there's going to be another prey shift. We're hoping that capelin or salmon lance or something might move up into the Arctic and deal with that. So there have been 2 range shifts for species that have also impacted the colony. There are 1 million horned puffins in the Bering Sea, roughly. That was the best census estimate in the 70s. And in the past, they only bred as far north as the Rocky Cliffs at Cape Lisbon. They came up to Cooper in 1986, and they came up because they are a subarctic bird that, with all this water opening up, this whole area was now becoming much more subarctic than it was Arctic. And that horned puffins started breeding on Cooper. Now, it was upsetting to have a less charismatic seabird than white guillemots come take over their nest sites, but they came in, and I mean, and of course I was very interested and happy that they came in. It was a very interesting climate change thing to see this range expansion. The only downside is that they are a nest competitor with black guillemots. They want to breed in the same cavities. And this is a photo of a nest where it was a big enough nest where you have a guillemot nest over here, and it's a great example of differences in alcid nest preparation. And this is the puffin nest over here. This didn't last long because the puffins then push these eggs out. One of the interesting things to see about this is that they are both cavity nesters, but guillemots aren't very good cavity nesters, just like they aren't very good seabirds. They still benefit from having some camouflage because they will breed in any cavity available. If you're a good cavity nester like a puffin or a woodpecker or things like that, you don't bother putting camouflage and any pigment on your shell. But they came in and started pushing out eggs and also killing young. And it is unsettling to come into a nest site where you've been weighing a chick for a number of weeks and realize that puffins have come in and killed it. We would have bands of puffins like this come into subcolonies and just wipe out all of the young. And puffins, when they were breeding there, they didn't have very good breeding success because polar bears started to come in and feed on their eggs and young. Polar bears were not found on Cooper Island or seen on Cooper Island until 2002, when after a storm pushed off this was very broken ice. So polar bears weren't liking this ice much. They like very large expanses of ice, but they were certainly out there because the ice came in, blew the ice offshore. And the day after that, this is the closest I ever was to a polar bear at that point. And it scared me to death. I didn't have a gun. The only gun was in this tent. Luckily, this bear kept walking. I ran and got the gun. But again, it was the real climate change message. I mean, once if you've been on an island for that long and then you suddenly see a polar bear, you like understand, yes, things are changing. What happened is that all the nest sites that I had created that gave me the easy access also gave polar bears access. They would come in from the ice and were hungry. There was essentially nothing else to eat on the island except me, I suppose. But they would go up to nest sites and flip them over and eat the eggs and chicks. This isn't the sort of climate change thing I had hoped to see. This bear was going to eat 2 chicks that had just hatched that day, and I blew a horn to get his attention. He looked over at me. He forgot those chicks. I went over and put the box back, though I obviously can't keep doing that for every time polar bears come in. But I realized at some point I was living in a tent up until 2002, and because polar bears wrecked our tent and had a search and rescue take us off the island in 2002, I needed a cabin. It's an 8x12 box that I've been living in ever since 2003. It's very comfy inside, and it's also polar bear proof, which is the important part of it. Um, and then I realized that I should probably, having seen that video after the bear was that close to the cabin, I realized I should put up a fence. And the fence works really well. This is a very young polar bear, or it's a small polar bear, recently separated from its mother. And it is actually, I mean, it's important to realize that bears are omnivores. So the fact that it's eating grass isn't just a sign that it's stuck there and it really can't get to its seals, but it is very upsetting to see female polar bears that are feeding young, that are lactating females that are feeding young, eating grass, realizing that they want to be eating seals and that they are going to be on land for some months trying to eat whatever they can and produce enough milk to keep their young going. So what happened with time is that I then realized that polar bears and puffins were doing major mortality. And somebody said, well, can't you possibly do something like find a nest site that polar bears can't get into? So I then, after the summer of 2009, where basically everybody got wiped out or almost everybody got wiped out by polar bears or puffins, I then got a pelican case, drilled a hole in one end, put in a baffle, put it at a place where birds have been breeding for a long period of time. The birds loved the site. They moved right in, hatched these 2 chicks. And this was a big test. I needed to see whether I should replace all the nest sites on the island with the cases. And this indicates that yes, like the world's largest terrestrial carnivore can't break into these sites. Now, this bear had eaten chicks at probably 20 or 30 nests prior to that. So it spent much more time than most bears do now with it because it thought it could get them. But I did in 2011 bring out 200 nest cases that I replaced all the wooden sites with. So it now looks like a Samsonite luggage truck exploded on the island. And I now am able to monitor chicks that are breeding in that are being raised in these sites. It's a very handy way of doing it, and most importantly, it deals with the polar bear issue. And also the parent birds like it a great deal because it's a very secure nest cabin. So you might have seen the Audubon article. It was a cover story about can these birds adapt to this? If you haven't seen it, Hannah Waters wrote up a very nice thing on this. Oh, could I ask you how much longer am I go? I know I'm pushing the edge right now.
Probably getting pretty close, George.
Okay, well then here, let me just go to this then. Essentially, this is a response to the black guillemot to warming in Arctic Alaska. They were able to expand their range in the 60s and 70s because of the snow melting earlier. And there was a short period when they thrived in the early 70s and the late 80s, in the 80s, but there was a warming, a major warming trend that started in the 1990s that changed ice conditions, and that shift in the sea surface temperature and the ice caused the population to decrease, and that currently you have the winter ice that are causing problems with the overwinter survival of both adults and young. So, and there are continuing population declines in the 20s and in the 2010s and 2020s as a result. So let me just go to this. So the take-home message is that the Western Arctic went from too cold to too warm to support ground nesting by guillemots in 50 years, which is like really something when you think about that rate of change. That basically I got there just as things were good for guillemots, and things are basically now not good for guillemots, and that we now have information that basically all the other colonies in the Western Arctic are going through the same problem, and that most importantly, because people care much more about a wide range of predators up there, is that the primary forage fish in the Arctic basin, the Arctic cod, has had these major declines or shifts in its distribution that are going to be impacting the predators. So people will say that seabirds are the canaries in the coal mine, and you may even say, oh, by the way, this was a talk about the seabird being the canary in the coal mine. When I'm talking to the media now, I say that basically that you should not say that it's the canary in the coal mine. What I am saying is that my research shows that the study species is responding to the effects of humanity's reliance on fossil fuel and the global warming caused by fossil fuel emissions, and that our inability to address this issue will result in major degradation of all the Earth's ecosystems, including the one supporting my study species. So making it clear, yes, the bird is important. Yes, this ecosystem is important, but global warming is a global issue. So yeah, I'd like to thank Joe McNally for taking this photo that was on the New York Times in 2002, and also doing his recent visit to Cooper Island in 2019 to like take the shot again to show me standing next to open water rather than to ice. So with that, I guess we'll take questions.
Thank you so much, George. So much information to think about. I have a bunch of questions, of course, on the side, but let me get to the ones that are in the chat right now. First one that we have is, what is the height of Cooper's Island in terms of feet above sea level? And when do you expect it to be submerged due to sea level rise?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, it's something that I started thinking about, as look at the impacts of climate change. I've been surprised that Cooper Island is around 6 to 7 feet above sea level. And it was underlain with permafrost up until recently. The permafrost is melting so that it is settling a little bit, but surprisingly, the sea level is not rising. And there are some things written up about the fact that the Arctic, because the Earth is not really round, it's somewhat pear-shaped, that you don't get the sea level rise that you're getting in other areas. So there has been no major change in the beach line on Cooper Island over the past 20, 30 years or so. Certainly at some point with major sea level rise, it will be underwater.
Have you done any models or anything to try and have an estimate of that, or is it something that you're just not focused on?
Oh, in terms of when it would disappear, when the
Yeah.
There are people who are doing view. I mean, Cooper is a depositional island in that there is a sand and gravel source east of Cooper that has been feeding it, so that the whole island has shifted a great deal, but it is building up at the western end, which didn't even exist. There are parts that didn't even exist there, so the island is actually building up. So it would all depend on what's going to happen to that source of sand and gravel. And no, to be honest, I have not looked to see at what point the sea level there would be 6 feet higher than it is now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Next question is, what's the tidal range on Cooper's Island?
Well, Cooper Island, like much of the Arctic, doesn't have a noticeable tide. I mean, no one who boats up there uses the tide. I mean, atmospheric pressure changes the level of the water around Cooper much more than any tide. I mean, we even have one sand spit that we look out at to basically judge atmospheric pressure, because we know that when like the pressure is low, that it's going to be covered with water, and when it's high, it's going to be exposed. But there's almost no tidal range at all.
That's really interesting. Another question: how many other guillemot colony sites are within 100 miles of Cooper Island that the birds could potentially move to?
There like isn't. I mean, Cape Lisburn, which is a rocky colony, that is around maybe 300 miles away. But I mean, other than places where there's cavities in boxes or floorboards and things like that, there aren't really any other colonies. And one of the important things is that guillemots really aren't a colonial seabird. I mean, they will readily breed as a single pair. There are a few breeding at the dock at Prudhoe Bay, but I mean, there is no place where these birds could really move to. And we are doing right now work looking at the sea surface temperature and ice conditions at all the populations in the region, and things are declining at all those places, so that there really is no place better that they could move to. Okay,
that's good to know. Another question: are there any commercial fishing pressure on Arctic cod in the area?
No, but NOAA is up there and doing surveys now. One of the important things is that NOAA ignored the Arctic for a long time because there was no commercial fishing, and NOAA is part of the Commerce Department. So that now they're getting up there mainly because pollock, which are like the major Bering Sea fishery, pollock are moving into the Chukchi, so they are interested in what's going on there. And as a result, they're making these statements based on their sampling about what's going on with cod populations. And I'm actually right in the middle of writing up something with a number of other people about the fact that they have totally overlooked the fact that there have been a lot of predators that have been feeding on Arctic cod, and that people who started sampling 10 years ago for fish in the Chukchi have no idea what was going on. So I mean, whether they start thinking about harvesting Arctic cod, I don't know. They're certainly harvesting Arctic cod in the eastern Arctic, but again, getting the population dynamics on it. I mean, it isn't like salmon that you can see them going up a stream and seeing how many there are.
Right.
And again, it would have major ecosystem impacts if they did it to any great extent.
Okay. One interesting question here. What other bird species do you see during your time at Cooper Island? And besides the increase of horned puffins, have other bird species increased or decreased?
Okay, well, yeah, and actually, well, we went to the island because there was a colony of 75 Arctic terns breeding on the island, and we found that they were very dependent on Arctic cod. That colony is now down to 8 pairs, and actually this could be an Arctic tern story in terms of what has happened to them. So that what was the largest Arctic tern colony on the North Slope now is just a few scattered pairs. We used to have Baird sandpiper breeding on the island because there were some freshwater ponds. There were places that held snow melt until late in the season, so there was habitat for them to feed in. Now with the melting of permafrost, there are no freshwater ponds, so Baird sandpipers suddenly disappeared, which was very upsetting because it was so great to have Baird sandpiper around. Long-tailed ducks breed on the island in a few. There's like less than 10 pairs breeding on the island, and Sabine gulls have been there every year, breeding maybe 5 pairs or so. But what's really amazing is that in the fall you have flocks of thousands of Sabine gulls flying by, feeding at the edge of the island.
Wow, those are fun birds for Connecticut for sure.
Yeah.
I had a question personally with your discovery of bear-proof cases. I'm sure that those are difficult to transport. Were you able? Do you just bring some out every time you go? What's the transport process for something like that?
Oh, well, I mean, I was very, I was going to buy Pelican cases, and I thought it was going to cost a great deal of money, but it turns out that there's a place called Plastic Case that has Nanook as its brand name, and I approached them and I said, could you possibly donate them to us? And they gave them to us at cost and sent 200 cases to me in Seattle. I drilled the holes here and put in the baffles and sent them up. And we took them up by snow machine over the ice in March when there was still, just solid ice from Utqiagvik out to Cooper. So they get out there rather easily once we got them up to Arctic Alaska.
That's great. No other current questions in the chat. So Tom, one more, hold on. A question of what misinformation has been published about all of this?
Well, luckily the New York Times story that came out about the work came out before the major climate change, or prior to climate change skepticism being a cottage industry, so that I didn't get that much, people saying, oh, by the way, isn't this true that thus and such? I mean, certainly people say, people like you to say, oh, by the way, how can you be upset? Clearly, ice is increasing in the Antarctic at this point, and various things like that. Nothing serious has ever. Nothing other than people who basically want to say that climate change isn't occurring have really come after the study. And also it's because, it's like, I mean, I had no reason to find this. I didn't want to find this. And that's brought out by some of the people who've made videos about this. Like, I just wanted to do a bird study. And I did do a bird study for basically 28 years until the turn of the century, when things started getting strange. And then, everything has changed. So, and then, yeah, I mean, people have said that, that basically I'm only doing this for the money, but I'm running a nonprofit that's an all volunteer organization. So, yeah.
Can't be true. All right, Tom, if you're able to pop back in for us, please.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. George, I just want to thank you so much. This has been an incredible presentation, and we hope that you have a successful upcoming years, and maybe you can come back in a few years and tell us that things have gotten better.
Yeah, well, I mean, I am going out again this year. People say, gee, are you going out again this year? And I go, gee, I don't know. What do you think? I think I should go. And also people say, gee, you must be really dedicated to do this now. And this gets back into being a birder, because there are people who say, gosh, why would you want to keep going out to the field? Which would be like asking a birder, why do you want to why would I go out and keep birding? And essentially, you don't go up to a couple who's been married for 47 years and say, I have to really, think that you two must be really dedicated to do what you do. Maybe they actually have enjoyed being married. So yeah, I have enjoyed doing this. It isn't pleasant to see what's going on, but I have to keep monitoring it as it's changing. And I'm hoping to wear this Connecticut Audubon hat this summer for a photo op that I will send to somebody so that you can post it while I'm up on the island.
And if you find any Connecticut warblers up there, please let us know.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, no, we have actually had an Arctic warbler on the island, which was a big deal. But yeah, I mean, it isn't great warbler habitat.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, great. So we really loved having you, and we'd love to have you back sometime. So we're going to stay in touch with you, and we'll be friends of Cooper Island with you going forward.
Okay, good. That'd be great. And Joe McNally, who's in Connecticut, he said he's coming back for the 50th, which is coming up, and that's going to be a big thing. And yeah, and I would love to come back and share more with you then. Okay,
that would be dynamite. And I also have to thank Tina Green, who found you. Tina, I don't know if you're on, but that's correct, right, George?
Yeah, it was Tina who first approached me about this. And I do feel bad. I was looking forward to coming back, though it's not an easy thing to get from Seattle to yours. But I mean, I was looking forward to an in-person meeting so I could really chat and show, and talk about a range of things. But maybe sometime in the future.
Well, we certainly hope so. We hope this is our last Zoom annual meeting, frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also want to thank Vice President Chris Wood and Allison Black, who managed this whole Zoom meeting. Chris or Allison, do you have anything you want to say before this is over?
No, just thanks, Tom, and good job. And thanks, George. And thanks, Allison. Everybody pulled it together very nicely. And we're all looking forward to getting together in real time next year.
Yeah, very, 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 very much. Allison, you want to say anything?
No, just echoing Chris's thoughts. Thanks.
No, thank you. We thank the technology gods that let us get through here without an internet outage like I had yesterday for several hours. That was good. So thanks to the technical gods. And what else? I want to thank everybody who's on here, everybody who joined for this meeting, and all of our 500 members. And I also want to say this is a very serious subject. And you can look at the empty half of this glass and get depressed, or you can look at the full half and say, this is the science that's needed to guide conservation decisions going forward. And that's what COA is going to try to do increasingly, because scientists like George are bringing us the facts, not misinformation, but what's really true. So George, keep up your great work. It's hard to be out there at the frontier for almost 50 years, George. You're incredible. Thanks for.
Well, thanks very much. And I greatly appreciate your letting me get the Cooper Island story out to a larger audience.
Yeah, and and as I said before, our website, ctbirding.org, will have this slide deck, and it will have information on this and future annual meetings. So thank you all. And George, unless you want to have the final word, this is it.
No, I mean, again, thank you. And, and again, it was birding that got me into this. So, I take birding very seriously. I didn't know when to leave the field when I was in high school, which kept me back in high school, but I don't know when to leave the field now, which keeps me getting good data. So staying out there and watching birds, yeah, is what it's all about.
Thank you. And thanks to the 7 people that I aim my President's Award at. There will be more information about each of them and why they got an award on our website. So website, ctbirding.org. Everybody remember that. Okay, folks, thank you. Thanks so much. And it's been an honor and a privilege to do this. And let's hope we can do this again next year and in person. Thank you very much. We're done. Over and out. Goodbye. Take care, George.
Bye-bye.
Chris, take us